Guten Tag, mein Name ist Clara Mavelia und ich leite das
Hello,
Cultural-
my name is Clara Mervelia and I run the Cultural Entrepreneurship Institute here in Berlin. Today I'm going to be talking to Brigitte Zypries, the former Minister of Justice and of Trade and Industry. Hello, Ms. Zypries, good to see you. Would you like to introduce yourself? Yes, my name is Brigitte Zypries. I imagine you've invited me along because I was a minister, twice to be precise. From 2002 to 2009, I was Germany's Minister of Justice, and from January 2017 to March 2018, I was Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy. Altogether, I've spent 20 years doing politics at federal level, but originally I was a lawyer, so that there's a certain evolution there around these issues to do with business and industry. So why did you study law? It was a very personal decision. I wanted to have a profession that would enable me to be independent in terms of income and where I could live in a big town. Could you perhaps tell us a little bit about what West Germany was like at the time? What was life like? Well, I have to say that I did my advanced school certificate in 1972 and then spent a semester studying education in Gießen, and then I switched to law. Gießen is a relatively small town in Hesse, a state in central Germany, which is very much a student town, and you could tell. The town was very much dominated by students. Apart from that, not an awful lot happened. Not that I want to do it down in any way. But if you're asking me what life was like in West Germany, yes, what was the atmosphere like? Well, there are a lot of issues, especially issues about women, where sometimes I think that not an awful lot has changed. Back then I used to write articles about discrimination of women, or what I thought was the improper treatment of women in the criminal justice system, for example, requirements relating to rape laws and the interpretation in case law back then. I thought it was very unfair if, on the one hand, women were advised not to resist in order not to incur the risk of being killed, and at the same time the courts used to say, well, if women don't resist, then obviously they were consenting to the act. That's complete nonsense in my eyes. I thought so then, and I wrote about it at the time. Basically what I'm trying to say is that very early on I began campaigning against the improper treatment of women at various different levels, and I always took the view that women were perfectly capable of doing their jobs, whatever they were. That's the fantastic thing, I think, these days, that now there are a number of different generations of women who are campaigning together for parity. I think it's the first time in history. In the 70s, I was in the women's movement too. And people used to say it's just a matter of time, a few years. Now my daughter's 20 and we still seem to be treading on the spot. Why is that, do you think? Why are things so slow? Well, it's a power question, I'd say. It's about who's in charge. And men don't really want to give anything up so easily, which one can understand, but I would share your view. I always used to oppose the idea of a gender quota. I thought women would manage without, but 20 years later, after lots of discussions with industry, I took the view that we do need a gender quota for supervisory boards to move things on. And of course, as soon as we adopted the Act, it suddenly turned out there were lots of women available to be put on supervisory boards, whereas they used to say, oh, there aren't any women to do it. Yes, I think that parity really is a question of justice, of fairness. How do you see this as a former justice minister? Justice. Yes, justice. Of course it's fair, it's just when everything is shared. I would endorse that, certainly. I would say that was the supreme objective. Feminism would have an influence on business, would speed things up. Not all men want to be constantly under pressure to compete. How do you see that? I think I would take a rather different view, because I think that women too can be very competitive amongst themselves. So I'm not so sure about that. But I think the really good thing is that if women and men, as equals, manage a company or found a startup or whatever they do, I think as a result of digitalisation, a lot is changing in the way that you have to respond to customers and how quickly you have to respond. So my creed is always that we need diversity in teams if we want to be really successful in business. And there are all kinds of studies that demonstrate that that is the case, that diverse teams are more successful than teams that only consist of older white men. And when I say diverse, I don't just mean men and women, I mean different age groups. I mean people with disabilities and people without. I mean people with lighter and darker skins or whatever. It means the entire diversity of life needs to be reflected in the management of a company. And I would be delighted if German industry were a little more flexible on that front. So that brings us on to industry. And I have a rather more general question on this, because a lot of people, if they're dissatisfied with the system, they start to criticize the market economy. And Adam Smith said, bakers don't sell bread because they love their neighbours. So why do you think the market economy is still the best of all systems? I don't think the market economy is the best of all systems. I think it's the social market economy that's the best of all possible systems. We have to recognise that the rights of workers, men and women, are properly reflected. So it's right that we have co-determination rights in companies, that we have proper rules for working time, proper protection for maternity, all these things that characterize a social market economy, so that there is enough attention paid to the rights of those who do the work. We need that. So that's one of the issues of the Social Democratic Party in Germany, the SPD. Why is the SPD not so popular at the moment? Well, if I had the answer to that, I'm sure I could help my brothers and sisters in political functions. But I don't know, unfortunately. It's a phenomenon that we're doing a good job. We're prevailing with good legislation, but other people seem to be carrying the laurels. The Social Democrats in Denmark have just won a majority in their elections a few days ago, and Sigmar Gabriel, the German SPD politician, said that that's because they had adopted other issues such as a more robust immigration policy. But we're getting very close to right-wing populism there, aren't we, don't you think? I don't think that Gabriel is correct, but I only saw the headline, I have to say. I don't know what Sigmar Gabriel really said. But I firmly believe that we should not be shifting to the right and adopting a fortress policy in order to be more successful in elections. People will vote for originals, and if they take those views, they're going to vote for Alternative for Germany. They're not going to vote for the Social Democrats. So I think that the content is also wrong. I wouldn't want to adopt that policy. I don't think it's humane. But to come back now to digitalisation, which you've already mentioned. As a former Justice Minister, that was one of your issues, the balance between civil rights on the one side and security on the other. It's a difficult one. How can you navigate through such difficult waters? Yes, it's true, it's difficult, because on the one hand, of course, we want the state not to take control of everything in the way that we're seeing in China, for example, in the moment. That isn't something that we would want in Germany. But at the same time, we have to empower the state in order to prosecute and investigate crime properly. And if criminals are working with digital means, then the state has to respond appropriately. So I always say, in the old days, if you watched thrillers on television, normally the detective inspector would come into the home of the murder victim, and the first thing he did would be to press the redial button on the telephone to see who the last conversation was with. Of course, now everything's quite different, and you can observe quite different things. So the police needs to have upgraded powers in order to be able to respond appropriately. So, in other words, there always has to be a balance case by case, because interventions in people's basic rights need to be proportionate. But I think we've done a quite good job about this, and we do in Germany have the Constitutional Court, which is always a correction device, if you like, in Germany to make sure that we don't go too far. Well, that raises another matter for me. Why is it that in Germany, and I'm not German, but I've lived here for a very long time, there's this program on television called Tatort, the crime scene, and it's so popular on television. Why are they so popular, these crime stories on television? I never watch them, but as you said, a lot of friends say that the average German on Sunday evening will be watching this crime story. To be honest, I can't tell you why Germans are so fond of their detective stories. When I do look to see what's on television, you can usually assume that one of the two major public broadcasters is going to be showing a detective story at any one time, which I think is a bit sad. And it's also not at all interesting. It's not relaxing. Well, that's a matter of taste. A lot of people do watch them, otherwise they wouldn't be shown. Right, the General Data Protection Regulation has just celebrated its first anniversary. What kind of changes would you like to see, or improvements? Have you thought about that? To be quite honest, I don't know. What I think is good about this regulation is that Europe has started to set standards now for companies, including companies outside Europe, who have to stick by them, and I think that's good. I get the impression that things a lot of people complained about at the beginning has now settled down, and the perhaps exaggerated fears have sorted themselves out in the meantime. So I don't really know what needs improving, to be honest. But that dilemma between internet presence and people revealing too much data, what can be done about that to protect ordinary citizens? Because there are so many things that are happening now hidden in the background where we ordinary consumers have no idea. Yes, but I think if you use the internet and you know about the regulations, so you know that there are cookies, and you know that that means certain data is going to be tracked. But apart from that, I think the best thing you can do is be thrifty with the data that you hand over. Perhaps not use the internet so much, maybe do your shopping not online, but go out into the high street and keep the town centres alive and enjoy going out there at the weekend, strolling around the streets, meeting people in cafes. But if you use a smartphone, normally you get tracked. You're constantly tracked, everything you do, where you are. That's something that young people forget. No, they don't actually forget it. They use it quite consciously. They want to be tracked, so that they can always find each other and find their way. I'm about to have visitors coming from outside town, young relatives of mine. They've set off and they have set the location so I can always see where they've got to. So it's not just for a taxi, to order a taxi, but so that you can see where they are. Quite handy if an old man who's forgotten where he is. Oh no, let's not joke about these things. This freedom needs to be protected on the internet, especially women's freedom. That's really important because, of course, women risk more online. If they begin a relationship and maybe later on content is published that they didn't want published, yes, but it applies to women and to men. There are simply people who are perhaps a bit misguided in that respect and publish things that they should not be publishing. And this is a complete abuse of trust with regard to the past of that relationship. But I think men and women are equally at risk there. I wouldn't say that women are more at risk than men in that respect. But of course, women are fundamentally more at risk than men, not specifically in this situation in relationships, but in terms of violent crime or cyber grooming and other things. There are quite a lot of things to worry about. And then the state needs to define new criminal offences. I did that when I was Minister of Justice because for the first time I introduced the offence of cyber grooming, for example, which we put in the civil code. And these things have to be adjusted. And of course one has to be cautious. Personally, if someone starts propositioning me on the online, I shouldn't naively fall for it. So it takes both sides. Of course, women are at risk. But if we come back to the present day, a few days ago, there was this story with cum-ex, this tax scam. It was in the newspapers again because at high level now, Deutsche Bank, the bank, are now being prosecuted for these transactions. And it struck me that all this tax evasion, or in fact, in this case we're talking about stealing tax from the state. It's men who are doing it. Men who have spent this kind of money. They spend it on a life of luxury and on escort girls and all these things like in the old days. So my question to you is, could it be that there is a correlation between testosterone and ethics? Or how do you see it? It's interesting that the investigators, the person who realized it was happening, was a woman. But there was a man too, the Minister of Justice and Finances in North Rhine-Westphalia was the person who most vigorously pursued those investigations and also spent money to buy CDs and to find out more about the people engaged in these illicit transactions. But it's true, of course, that this society is geared to, or let's say there is a positive view in this society of people who have money displaying that they have money by buying a fancy car or taking a fancy cruise on a yacht. Or there's that joke, isn't it, about the two men who meet and show each other the size of their cars, their house, their yacht, and so forth. I do think that maybe men are more at risk with that kind of thing than women. I'm not saying that women aren't going to be tempted by that behavior too, that there aren't some women who like to show off their money, if they were allowed to have the money. Yes, but there are women who show off too. There is a limit though. If you think about the populists, they're very backward looking. They have this image of women in the 1950s. The men have all the money, and because the men have all the money, they can afford all kinds of services from women, as Trump himself has said, and I'm not going to repeat what he actually said. But Salvini's no better. Hardly does he come to power, and he takes those 59 million for his life of luxury from the EU funds. And he's still got to hand the money back. It's impossible. It's unacceptable. I don't know if women would be any better, but they haven't got that far yet in order to demonstrate whether or not they would be. How do you see that? Could it be that if more women were in leadership positions, we would see less of this kind of display of power and money and so forth? Is it more of a male thing? Is it a macho thing? I can't answer that. You need to ask somebody who understands psychology or sociology. That's not really my specialization. I don't know if there is a limit. It does seem that women are less vulnerable for this kind of thing, but of course there are women who do like to show off and spend a lot of money on clothes and have thousands of pairs of shoes and very high heels and so forth, but perhaps there are different ways of showing off for women. But these are not things that I can judge. What did you find so fascinating about being a minister? Well, if you're a minister, you can shape things. You can initiate legislation in Parliament, and Parliament then discusses it and makes decisions. And I think I initiated quite a lot of laws as a justice minister. You served under Schröder and under Merkel, both trade and industry and justice. Can you talk to us a bit about that? There are a few laws that were important to you. Both under Schröder and under Merkel, I was Minister of Justice, and because I served in two legislatives, I was able to get some things moving. As I said, the offence of cyber grooming and similar offences that I introduced. Also, we talked a lot about living wills and incorporated that into the civil code. We also changed a few things about maintenance for children. We introduced some provisions on stalking in the criminal code. That's something that women are more affected by men. So I think there are things you can do as a minister. These days, a lot of young people are interested in ecology and the climate crisis. What would you like to see if people are interested in politics, young people? Is ecology enough, or do you have to have a broader perspective? I think it's great that they are caring about the environment, and more is always better, of course. I'd always want more men and women to be committed to political issues in Germany and try together to improve the way we live our lives. And that is just the same sort of thing, to adopt laws and decide what you think is right and what you think is wrong. It would be wonderful if everyone took part. You support startups, you're interested in startups. Why is it so important to shape the world in that way as well, with a startup? Well, that's got something to do with industry again and digitalisation. We need young people who approach ideas differently. People who've spent a lot of years improving a certain kind of metal part are not likely to want to replace that metal part by a completely new application. That's why we need startups, because often they come up with completely new ideas. And if we want to develop our industry, which I want to happen, I want Germany to remain competitive, I want us to be in a good position 10 years down the road, and then we need the startups, and above all, the collaboration between established industry and startups. What would your message to users be? People who watch videos like this one on YouTube, what message would you like to give them? Well, in the spirit of what we were just saying, my message would be, get involved, take part, tell us your opinion, join the discussion, look at the details, maybe come up with compromises, because you can't always get your way 100%. You always have to be prepared to compromise if you want to do things as a community. But it's important that the community does shape things together, and that it's important that people say what they think. And the last question, what are you devoting your energy to now? What plans do you have? I volunteer in quite a lot of different things, and I enjoy doing that. At the moment, I'm working with startups a lot and also on women who want to start businesses, advising them, helping them, and using my contacts where I can to help. I'm in the Startup Association. I work very much with the Women's Network there. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.